But
I don't
liberalism
think it's stupid.
is not inevitable. So I was thinking about our class is that our pedagogy implies a certain ambition, which is that, and in a way it's only local to what we do, because we are able to practice diversity in ways that other places can't.
Because I need to articulate, I'm just challenging to say it again.
Because we know the price of not trying, right? Because we live in a place, right? I mean, it's like postmodernism. If it exists in the minds of people in the art world and in universities. Meaning we come here and it's like, oh, people still are religious actually, right? They don't believe with any less, fervor, and they still have their stories. And what we were trying to do, and I think that's next level, is to say, as Naomi said, I just keep on coming back to it. You tell your stories with kindness.
Mm-hmm. The multiple narrative.
That, it's, I'm kind of looking for a universalism in it, and I think the universalism is, I really think this whole project is, I don't think a non-Jewish person would be able to write what I'm writing, not only because of the Midrash, but we are the model of, we said, okay, Christian story, we'll be part of it, right? Okay, right? We'll lead orchestras and write books and we'll be part of it, it's okay. And we're not claiming, we're not asking for, we are asking for recognition, whatever. But we went on acknowledging another culture. It exists. And I think that's the universalism is the real revelation. For me, I think I might have mentioned this to you. For me, the revelation at Sinai is the idea of relationship, not just revelation as a delivery system. Obviously, nobody treats it as such, but the revelation, and that's the shared revelation of humanity of Sinai, that you can enter into a relationship. So the universalism of I think what we practiced is acknowledging that need among other people. That need to.
It's not what I thought you were writing at all. Sounds very engrossing.
Well, this is really where I'm moving up. It moves on from Milton, because as we've discussed, Milton is not ready to enter that world, right? Milton and Samson Agonistes is not ready to enter that world, because the way I read it is that all the different characters in the play tried to narrate Samson, including Samson, and all their narrations are false. Meaning Delilah uses the lens of romance, Homeric ideas of the feminine, and Manoah, he wants to, at the end, it's bizarre. He says, I'm going to build a shrine for Samson, and virgins are going to come every year and lament his poor marital choices. Like it's almost parody to me. I mean, I read it. That's the way I read it as a Miltonist. So for me, that's the agony of not being able to go on. And Locke, I mean, I think, Milton understands in whenever he wrote it, 73, that Locke is around the corner and he doesn't like it. Locke and Charles and decadence and luxury.
Well, let's start there. So you've said that Milton anticipates Locke, even though Locke follows Milton by a number of decades. What do you mean by that?
I remember the first article that I wrote as an academic was about why Milton is not a liberal. And the reason I had to write that article was because everybody was claiming that he is a liberal. And there are things, and you guys, we didn't learn Areopagitica together, but there are parts about Milton, we talked about his emphasis on freedom and autonomy, that are very, very much intrinsic and central to what we as liberals believe. However, Milton only sees that possibility within the one story. And now we'll talk about a text that we do know, Paradise Lost. Milton, and one of the interesting things about Paradise Lost is that the book performs in a way its own undoing. What do I mean by that? That even though that Milton gives the energy or registers the energy of the person, Satan, who doesn't want to be part of the big story anymore, right? I don't want to be part of that big story. I want to break the lens. I want, as Satan's, and we talked about in class how Milton is always using metaphors of writing. Satan wants to write himself independently. That in a way is the story of liberalism. But in Milton, Satan is Satan, right? What happens in, and what you can really think of, I said before that Milton undoes his own system, is there, you already feel the tension in his work through which he's kind of breaking open this providential frame, right? The providential frame being the one story, right? Where God is author of all things. And Milton, even though he has these instincts towards diversity and autonomy, he sees those only fulfilled within his Christian story. He's an idealist, really, and religious fundamentalists are idealists. But at a certain point, you have to say that, and this is where Locke comes in, that your idealism has to take a backseat to our survival as a culture. Meaning, if we let everybody have their out of control fundamentalisms, if that's the world we live in, then it's just going to be continual religious war. And I think Locke comes in, and the difference for Locke is that he acknowledges that anybody who everybody can tell their own story. I mean, which direction do you want to go in with this? I mean, so what do you lose by moving?
How do you get from class? The question I'm asking is, not the question I'm asking. I get the story we're telling.
Yeah.
And I'm learning it alongside our students, is how we go from classical humanism, a very specific cultural code of the ancient world and
exactly right,
Greece or in Rome, through the Christian humanism of Milton, which is precisely what you're describing, that there is reason, there is freedom, but these are granted by God and lead back to God. The freedom to choose God in one's own way, in direct enthusiasm, in direct address of a Protestant ethic. Not the Protestant, but a Protestant theology.
I would say a Protestant way of reading. That's the most
Protestant way of reading, okay. And Locke, who is also, of course, religious and from a dissenting family, pure Protestant family, says we need to control this and we need to move towards a humanism that is inherently secular, where reason exists, reason stands on its own. Is that accurate?
I think, right, that there is an idea now, and of course this has to do with the rise of science as well, where there emerges an idea of, I'm not going to utter the word I say we should never utter, an idea of the objective truth, right? Of some kind of truth that exists without subjects. And part of that classical tradition that we're talking about never would consider that. There is never a truth without subjects reading. And in a way, and Locke,
which is a myth. I mean, this is why your discomfort with that is the notion of bracketing or removing the reader is itself a story that we've told ourselves, that the sort of Enlightenment thinkers, I mean, it's a proposition there, but it has its own critique that has been leveled for some 40 years now. That they too have a position that they're sort of generalizing their own white male. That's the critique of it, the postmodern one. We don't need to go there now, but that there is, as you're saying, a kind of natural perspective, which is those are the terms that Leviathan, Hobbes, that the two treatises of government, which are the texts I'm reading this year, that I'm reading with the students, as well as Locke's other writings, engage, that there is
Okay,
natural, the nature outside of God.
okay, so you're going a little fast for me. So I want to address two things. One
And
is,
I thought you were going fast for me.
okay, so I want to address two things. One is the movement from Milton to Locke and what that means. And then I want to ask you, what for Locke guarantees social cohesion? First question. I think there is an answer to that. And why is it unsatisfying?
Mm-hmm.
So first,
Milton to Locke, that's your wheelhouse.
That's my wheelhouse. And here's the pitch. Swung on, little baseball humor there. So Milton, you would say, well, why? Everybody, when we read Milton, they were like, why? What does he gain other than expressing his prejudice? And that's a question from a liberal perspective, and it's a fair question. But what you lose in Locke is bidyavad. We would love to live in a world in which we were all joined together by the same story, and in which our culture and communities were defined in this way. It sounds so idealistic, but the people who actually believe that and want to make it happen, they are fundamentalists, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Milton, what you lose in Milton is this sense of building the destiny of a community together. I'm sure you're going to be talking about Isaiah Berlin, the 20th century philosopher. You are, yeah?
I guess now we are.
right. And without going into
students, our reading list just expanded.
You're welcome. So Berlin just talks about two kinds of liberty. One is negative liberty, which we enjoy, and negative liberty is really don't do anything to me that you don't want to do it to you. Hillel, really, right? Don't mess with me. So, and negative liberty is great because it protects me, but it also means that my aspirations to have communities that encompass everybody according to my ideals, I can't do that. I have to chill out. My religious ideals, they're private. Go to church, go to shul, do whatever you want. Go to mosque, do whatever you want. So Berlin's idea of positive liberty, that applies to what I just said about Milton. We're building the destiny of the city-state, the polis, the Christian community, all the things we've talked about, right? Greek republicanism is positive liberty, and it's very exclusive, right? Property owners, men, right? So the price of positive liberty is not, we're not willing to pay that as a culture anymore. I think. Meaning,
wow, that last claim is a powerful one. There is some of that, what you just quoted from Berlin, from Isaiah Berlin, is also, it's quite small here, but it is, I can share it with you as well. It is in Locke to a certain degree. You can see here.
Wait, so let's read it slowly. Can I read it out loud?
Sure.
But though men, when they enter into society, give up the equality, liberty, and executive power they had in the state of nature into the hands of the society, to be so far disposed of by the legislative as the good of the society shall require. Well, I'm just thinking before the semicolon, how is this similar to Hobbes and how is this different?
Yeah, well, we'll get there in a second.
Okay. Yet it being only with the intention in everyone, the better to preserve himself. So that's Hobbes, his liberty and property. That's Locke, right? The emphasis on property. For no rational creature can be supposed to change his condition with an intention to be worse. Part of this implicit social contract is that I have a benefit in it, right? I mean, the benefit in Hobbes is minimal. The benefit in Hobbes is the Leviathan is going to prevent me.
You get to survive. It's their survival.
I get to live. I get to live, right? Oops. We're done with that?
That's all we got. That's all we need to do.
Okay.
But the idea that you are both freed from certain, free from constraint, free from threat, but you also have rights that you can exercise externally, are that it has its initial exposition there. we have to focus on what you were already saying, that from Milton to Locke. But I just want to answer more simply, what exactly makes the social contract cohere? You asked about cohesion.
That's what I asked.
It's obviously much easier to answer with Hobbes. Hobbes, it's our mutual destruction, our despicable nature, and we lay down our arms. It's an arms treaty.
So
the same thing that it's what the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, the Soviet Union, now gone, and the United States did. We will destroy each other if we keep this up, and so let us mutually disarm.
One second, but this is internal to the culture, meaning meaning we're not talking about two states against one another. We're talking about individuals within the culture.
Yeah, there is no culture without sovereignty, without the social contract, according to Hobbes. And he also doesn't.
I just want to say, and with Hobbes, that is so desirable that we're willing to sacrifice everything, even to a strong man. Not every. I mean, he talks about things that we're not.
Almost everything.
Almost everything. Right.
It's the only way to defend ourselves against the common good. The common power is to defend them from the invasion of foreigners, the injuries of it. There's really nothing. The level, it's, as he says, so brutish, short, selfish, without the common social contract, that you'd be a fool not to engage in it. But you're right, it's only negative, and thereby secure them in such a way as their own industry. Let me share this with you also. But that argument, the cohesion, is much more obvious with Hobbes. With Locke, that's a much steeper hill to climb. This is Hobbes, the end of Hobbes.
Right. Can I read it?
I was just paraphrasing this. It's not that hard to grasp. It's, again, very arresting, very striking, very bracing, very uncomfortable. But it's not, it's very clear.
I would just say this in relationship to what we studied together in the Renaissance. Just leave that there for a second, Daniel. Mm-hmm. We talked, if you remember, about this idea of discordia concors. We talked about that in relationship to Donne, a harmonious discord where differences and similarity coexist. Now here, Hobbes is using that trope, but look how he's using it. So what we have to do, I'm picking up on the fourth line down in the middle at the end, is to confer all their power and strength. The people confer all their power and strength upon one man, or upon one assembly of men that may reduce all their wills by plurality of voices into one will. So that, I mean, you see that he's playing with the same idea, but in Hobbes, the plurality gives into the one.
Yes, yes. There's something else animating Locke, and with this we can go back to the larger question of the arc from Milton to Locke. I'm going to answer some greater understanding of this transition from Milton to Locke, and perhaps get some more firm, a better grasp on Locke, and that would definitely suffice for this conversation. It's something else that's going on in Locke, isn't it?
Tell us what's
Tell us what's
Tell it
on the mountain.
Tell it on the mountain.
It is, I find it very appealing, but it's also timid. It is an ethos and a polis of reason. That everyone will act reasonably and venerate, almost submit to the exercise of reason, to the extent that he seems like a mid 20th century economist.
Exactly right.
The Homo logicus, Homo economicus, who does everything logically and always acts in one's, and the mutual, the Kantian idea, something who came later than Locke, just invoking an idea of a German philosopher who spoke of the ethical imperative that we always will act in the ethical way, since if you understand the right thing to do, wouldn't you do it? Mm-hmm. But of course, it so much seems to ignore actual human nature. Later in the semester, I will contrast Locke with David Hume, who emphasizes the emotions. You've been writing of late about relationship, that it's not about individuals, and Locke is so focused on the individual that and what brings us into relationship is that we are all individuals governed by reason. Mm-hmm. It almost ignores how our relationships function, which are almost always a product of emotion and passions.
Can I bring
That's it. That's what I have to say.
Can I bring up just two? I don't know how much patience the students have, but they can turn it off at any time, right? But this is going to be interesting. It's all been interesting. I want to tell you about one of Locke's students. And then I want to ask the question that everybody is asking the class: why are we doing this, Dr. Feldman? This is a literature course. So that's what we'll end with, right? But Locke had a student, and he was the third Earl of Shaftesbury. And can you imagine having Locke as a teacher? Right? Locke is not only, you said timid. When I write about Locke, I see him as being very sober, right? Locke looks back on everything that happened in the earlier part of the 17th century and says, no, we don't want any of that, right? And the catchword for it is enthusiasm. And when Locke rejects enthusiasm, he's rejecting Milton as a political thinker, as a poet, right? We can't deal, what would be a way of talking about enthusiasm? What's a contemporary definition for it?
Personal calling. Personal.
Right, the fervor of the certain. I mean, that's what Locke didn't like, the fervor of the certain, and really I think the most political book that he writes is his essay concerning human understanding, which is about how people know, and that book is dedicated to telling people it's very hard to know, you don't know very much, so make the claims the claims you make about reality have to be very, very limited. And certainly what people like Milton were claiming, prophetic voice, forget it, right? It's there again, that goes to what you were talking about, reason. So Shaftesbury, student of Locke, he's really, instead of looking forward to the 18th century, looking back to Shakespeare and Milton, he still has a poetic temperament. And what I mean by that poetic temperament, and it's not the la-di-da-di poetic temperament, it's a belief in the complexity of the psyche. And I think that's another way of saying what Dr. Feldman just said. It's not only the belief in reason, it's the pushing aside of the parts of the psyche that are not reasonable. And Shaftesbury, as a political thinker, and he's not at all organized as a political thinker, but he understands this about people. He writes a book called The Letter Concerning Enthusiasm. And enthusiasm for him, he attaches it. It's a brilliant rhetorical move. Not with the 17th century radicals and revolutionaries like Milton, but the fundamentalists, the bigots, and the fanatics of his age. It's kind of a turnaround. And he condemns enthusiasm, but he acknowledges it. You can't get rid of it. It's almost like he has an implicit conception of Freud's sublimation, meaning there is this part of the human personality that if you don't do something with it, it's going to turn against you. And the reason I mentioned this little known person is because that has what the Lockean model has led to really what Shaftesbury anticipates. You can't keep on repressing everything. That sober idea of the mind and soul is just, it doesn't work for me, right? It doesn't work for communities. We need more.
And it also creates a very dispiriting general trajectory of humanity that one of Locke, and he's not certainly the only one, Locke, Rousseau, the whole Diderot, the whole school of Enlightenment thinkers from Western Europe, including Kant as well, they established this narrative of, they call it progress, of Enlightenment progress, that now we are entering into more reasonable, more rational era, an enlightened era, Aufklärung, as it says in German. Enlightening, clearing up to ourselves, clarifying. And any reversion to the enthusiasm, the passions, the personal calling, the avocation, and the darker, more mysterious and more problematic aspects of the human soul are always backsliding. And what we've been involved in the last 20 years, 30 years of, this course will be on for during the 2020s, during this decade, is a question of that. Are we entering into despite our digital tools, into a new kind of, backslide, a new kind of digital dark era.
I think that's the question. And really,
and it's their narrative that is just as problematic. Yeah.
So this is where we really started our conversation today, and where we started with our students in 191 last year. That is, we are in the position to know here that reason does not dominate. I mean, the idea that reason dominates is a very Western idea. We see the persistence true of fanaticism, but we can't dismiss our desire for community, our desire for stories, as we feel the urgency of them. And what we did when we went to the museum together and we saw those 6th century church, synagogue, and mosque is we acknowledged there are lots of different stories here, and they're still compelling to people, even some of us in the classroom. And what we're learning together is it goes beyond Locke, because Locke's liberalism, as you said, is a Christian liberalism. And we're talking about multicultural liberalism. I don't know, that we and part of it, and this is Shaftesbury's as well, we recognize that what you refer to as the dark side, it's also the light side. It's the place of poetry, right? It's a place of community. It's a place of relationship. And that's why the dominant narrative reason is so problematic, because it leaves us without civilized ways of using that part of ourselves.
Yeah, it's not only the Athenian, but it's also the Apollonian. It's also the Bacchic. And
right. The pleasures of poetry.
Wonderful. Okay, well, the letter of toleration remains to be written in the Middle East, and it is definitely...
We're writing it, Dr. Feldman. We're a work in progress.
With our students. We're all co-authors in that epistle. All right, thank you for joining me.
I do want to ask you something.
Sure. Just stop the recording. Excellent. I hope that makes sense to students. That was definitely